Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for this inaugural event. Um, Good morning and welcome to Education and Equity Solutions webinar. We are very happy that you have joined us today. My name is Dr. Keith Holliday, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. Our goal is to create a community of like-minded individuals that can discuss the impact of systemic racism in all sectors of professional life. So in future webinars, it will not just be education, we'll branch into other fields like healthcare, music, business, banking, and industry. We have three outstanding presenters that will be joining us today in the conversation about anti-racism and equity in education. If you think that the 60s civil rights struggle is over, then you have not been watching the news. 2020 was one of the worst years for civil unrest after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The educational disparity gap has not improved for minority children since the 1980s. The educational disparity gap feeds the wealth gap, the healthcare disparities gap, and the school to prison pipeline. The lack of education explains poverty in the minority community. As per census.gov in 2019, poverty rates in the Black community were at 18.8% and the Hispanic community 15.7%. Non-Hispanic white poverty was at 7.3%. So you can see that poverty in the Black community is almost double that of the white community. Just this week, as an example of educational inequity was the news from the University of Maryland. The governor of Maryland signed a $577 million historic landmark HBCU settlement bill. This lawsuit stemmed from historic state underfunding of the four HBCUs in Maryland system and in the Maryland system. The bill will impact Bowie State, Morgan State, Compton State, and Maryland Eastern Shore. Morgan State will receive $24 million. Bowie State will receive $16.8 million. University of Maryland Eastern Shore, $9.7 million, and Compton State, $9 million. The money will be used for scholarships, new programs, and faculty recruitment. Let's start with some history.
When it comes to education, there's a significant achievement gap between white students and students of color. This gap has been the same since the late 1980s, and in fact, it used to be much worse. To understand why, let's rewind to the beginning. Puritans of Massachusetts were the first to experiment with public schooling. The Massachusetts School Law of 1647 required every town with 50 or more households to teach children how to read and write, and they paid for this with a property tax law. Free schooling was highly controversial in the 19th century, but eventually all states added a right to public schooling to their constitutions. Well, they extended this right to white children. In the 17 and 1800s, Southern states passed anti-literacy laws that made it illegal to teach Black people how to read and write. After the Civil War, those laws were abolished. The new rule was the Supreme Court decision Plessy versus Ferguson, which stated that education could be separate but equal in 1896. And this was the law for a long, long time.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Some areas, either by law or by practice, segregated schools for Latino, Asian, and Native Americans. Schools were definitely separate, but they were not equal. Black schools were overcrowded, many used hand-me-down books from white schools, and struggled to attract teachers with the low pay on offer. If a town only had enough money to build one school, it would de facto be for white children. Nationally, Black people pushed to increase access to and quality of education, despite Jim Crow laws. Literacy rates rose 50% in the decades leading up to 1910. In 1954, the landmark Supreme Court decision Brown versus the Board of Education outlawed racial segregation in schools. Again, outcomes were positive. Graduation rates, standardized test scores, years of education, income, and health improved for Black people. Racial prejudice decreased among white people. A large part of the success came from forced integration, busing students across neighborhoods to create more diverse classrooms. But Supreme Court decisions in the 70s undercut that movement. Milliken versus Bradley in 1974 said that two-way busing between Detroit's Black schools and white schools in the suburbs wasn't required. Today, schools are almost as segregated as they were in the late 60s. And again, they are not equal. There's no right to education mentioned in the founding documents, so the United States is relatively unique among nations by leaving it up to local areas to determine the quality of their schooling. We still use the system the Puritans came up with, local property taxes, to fund local schools. What this means is that spending on education varies widely by the economic status of the district. Since race is so precisely mapped onto socioeconomic status, the outcomes for Black and white students are widely different. This doesn't mean each Black and brown child is poor, but school districts serving people of color receive $23 billion less in funding than white school districts, despite having roughly the same number of students. That works out to be about $2,200 more per student for white school districts. The financial differences affect other outcomes as well. In a study of children from 3rd to 8th grade, white students scored an average of 1.5 to 2 grade levels higher than Black students. Hispanic students lagged behind white ones by 1 to 1.5 grade levels. White students are 1.8 times as likely to be in advanced placement classes than Black students. Black students are almost 4 times as likely to be suspended. Black people also lag behind in college enrollment and completion rates. Now, as the COVID-19 pandemic forces many schools to rely on remote learning, many students are disappearing from the system. They are most definitely poorer and from communities of color. The educational disparity is pervasive, long-standing, and crystal clear. The question becomes, why is it that unequal schooling opportunities have disadvantaged the same groups of people for the past 400 years? And when will that change?
Okay, that was a very informative video, and I hope you learned something there. Okay, we will start with our first speaker. Dr. Carolyn Gaston Holliday has been an educator for over 30 years. She has an undergraduate degree from Vassar College in anthropology and elementary education. Dr. Holliday received her master's degree in instructional technology at New York Institute of Technology. In 2019, Dr. Holliday earned her doctorate degree in curriculum and teaching from North Central University. Dr. Holliday was selected as the 2010 Teacher of the Year in Columbia County, Georgia. Dr. Holliday has served as an elementary teacher, literacy interventionist, campus instructional coach, and district level RLA instructional coach, and district level instructional coach / curriculum writer in elementary social studies. Currently, Dr. Holliday manages a grant that focuses on improving the quality of teacher-student interaction in pre-K classrooms. Dr. Holliday.
Greetings. Thank you, Equity and Education Solutions, for providing this opportunity to discuss the impact of educational disparities on people of color. This brief talk, titled Culturally Relevant Coaching, Empowering the Anti-Racist Educator, will explore the importance of equipping teachers with strategies to address the impact of educational disparities. As an instructional coach, my goal is to support, educate, and sometimes change the mindset of educators so that they practice equitable and anti-racist teaching. I want to take this time to acknowledge my thought partners in this work of equity and anti-racism, Danielle and Susie. Thank you, sisters. Again, my name is Dr. Carolyn Gadsden Holliday. I'm passionate about culturally relevant pedagogy, equity, and disrupting racism in education. I am honored to be presenting at this inaugural event with my friend, my sister, and my soror, Dr. Kendra Thurman, and Professor Dr. Jerry Wallace. This is a learning community, so it is important to have parameters that will guide us as we engage in this conversation. So expect to learn something new, be willing to share your truth, to question and share your truth, be comfortable with discomfort, accept non-closure, and know that this is a safe space. These are our goals as we enjoy this time together. We will explore educational disparities. We will increase our knowledge of equity constructs that are critical to this work, and we will investigate the idea of culturally relevant coaching. To begin our journey, I ask that you reflect on this question. How has your racial or ethnic identity impacted your educational journey? And feel free to use the chat. Remember that when you use the chat, if you want to talk to us, please make sure that you click on panelists and all attendees. But please feel free to use the chat to answer that reflection question. This quote is one of the ways that educational disparities originated. Slave owners knew that literacy for slaves equated to power. Enslaved Africans knew that literacy was essential to empowerment. Therefore, the white supremacist educational system at that time sought to deprive Black people from a most elemental right, the right to literacy. The educational system that exists today centers whiteness in terms of curriculum and instruction. Consider the backlash educators have received as they attempt to implement ethnic studies or studies such as the 1619 Project that consider the experiences and legacy of Black people and slavery in American history. Consider the curriculum that you were taught and the curriculum in schools today. Through what lens was and is it developed and implemented? To me, this quote is the bedrock, the foundation regarding teaching and especially teaching students of color, because critical thinking is the essence of culturally relevant pedagogy. To address disparities, it is important that teachers implement pedagogy that honors the culture of students of color. Over 20 years ago, Gloria Ladson-Billings introduced the idea of culturally relevant pedagogy. Culturally relevant pedagogy represents a set of strategies originating from her seminal work, The Dream Keepers, and asserts that pedagogy that is culturally relevant perpetuates collective empowerment through the constructs of academic success, cultural competence, and socio-political/critical consciousness. With the work of Ladson-Billings as a foundation, Geneva Gay developed a framework focusing on teacher strategies and practices. The term culturally responsive teaching, developed by Gay, uses the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant, to and effective for them. Both Geneva Gay and Ladson-Billings place emphasis on students' critical thinking about societal inequities. They also come from a place of asset versus deficit thinking regarding the instruction of students of color. Dr. Gay's ideology of culturally relevant teaching is the action that pedagogical practitioners take when they are invested in culturally relevant pedagogy. Culturally relevant teaching is theory in practice. Therefore, it is essential to educate teachers about the criticality of culturally relevant instructional practices. I want to take a few moments to share facts that propelled me to develop a framework that would support teachers as they implement culturally relevant and anti-racist teaching practices. There are fewer students of color in advanced courses than their white peers. This is often due to the lack of referrals from teachers. About 80% of public school teachers are white. Consider that only 7% of teachers are Black and 2% of those Black teachers are males. Students of color are suspended and expelled in disproportionately larger numbers than their white peers, beginning in preschool. This behavior by classroom educators sets the foundation for the school to prison pipeline. I want to tell you a quick story. A mom goes to pick up her 3-year-old son and finds him in the classroom separated from his peers behind a gate that looks like prison bars. The mom is told he is there because he's acting out, being aggressive, touching a teacher inappropriately. When pressed for details, the teacher really doesn't say anything that strikes the mom as unusual for a 3-year-old. He's playing, he wants to hug his teacher. The mom is devastated to see her son secluded in that manner. That mother was me, and that little boy, now my 17-year-old son. The teacher, young and white. What made my son different from many of the other children? He's big, he's Black, and he's a boy. How would that story be different if the teacher would have had culturally relevant coaching? A report from the New York Times from October 2020 titled "The Battle for the Souls of Black Girls" state that the most recent discipline data from the Education Department found that Black girls are over 5 times more likely than white girls to be suspended at least once from school, 7 times more likely to receive multiple out-of-school suspensions than white girls, and 3 times more likely to receive referrals to law enforcement. The U.S. Department of Education's biannual civil rights data show that all kinds of schools, rural, suburban, and urban students in schools with high enrollments of students of color have less access to certified and experienced teachers than their white peers. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress data from 2019, students of color scored an average of 23.5 points below their white peers in terms of reading proficiency. In 2018, 77% of characters in children's books were animal/other or white. To understand culturally relevant pedagogy and address educational disparities, it is critical to have knowledge around the constructs that are associated with equity. These terms provide a common language and understanding of ideas around equity. We're going to briefly explore some of these constructs. These constructs are important in terms of deepening our understanding of educational equity, disrupting racism in education, and the necessity for culturally relevant educational practices. Racism is grounded in power. Racism, according to the ADL, is the marginalization and/or oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. So to be anti-racist, according to Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, is to support an anti-racism policy through actions or expressing anti-racist ideas. To say that you are simply not racist is perpetuating neutrality. According to Elena Aguilar, white supremacy is the ideology that white people are superior. In education, this is exemplified in what is taught in the curriculum and what is not taught. Think history and literacy and how African-American culture is often not present, and curriculum subjects are often taught through a white lens where whiteness is centered. For example, the idea that slavery is taught as a benevolent institution. In 2018, in San Antonio, Texas, parents complained about a history homework assignment that asked 8th graders to list the positive and negative aspects of slavery. The activity was aligned to a textbook used in the school for around 10 years, titled Prentice Hall Classics, A History of the United States. It argued that all slave owners were not cruel. As a matter of fact, it said, quote, "A few slaves never felt the lash, and many may not have been terribly unhappy with their lot, for they knew no other." Before I continue, I want to tell you a brief story. A father and son were involved in a car accident in which the father was killed and the son was seriously injured. The father was pronounced dead at the scene of the accident, and his body was taken to a local morgue. The son was taken by ambulance to a nearby hospital and was immediately wheeled into an emergency operating room. A surgeon was called. Upon arrival and seeing the patient, the attending surgeon exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's my son." Can you explain this? So just take a moment and just share in the chat. Explain how this attending surgeon exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's my son." I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are. I see one person. Anybody else have an idea? I see a couple. All right, a couple of people said the boy had two fathers. Some people said that it was his adoptive father. And some people actually did say it was his mom. So the point of this particular activity is to just kind of think about our biases. When I asked this question to Keith, he immediately said, oh, it has to be a grandfather or a dad. And again, this is an activity just to think about our biases. Often people immediately think male versus female. So kudos to those people that said mom. So this brings us to talking about implicit bias. Implicit bias are those attitudes or stereotypes affecting our actions, understanding of events, and decisions in an unconscious manner that may advantage some people while disadvantaging others. In a study conducted by Yale researcher Dr. Walter Gilliam, he had teachers observe and identify children, one white girl, one black boy, one white boy, who were misbehaving during a play session. The teachers overwhelmingly chose the black boy as the child who misbehaved most often. What was most interesting is that the children were actors and none of them misbehaved during the observation. They were simply playing. In the study, Dr. Gilliam discusses the disparities regarding pre-K expulsion and suspension rates between Black and white students, particularly boys. The study also provides data about the role implicit bias plays in pre-K teachers' assumptions of what constitutes misbehavior and who misbehaves most often. He emphasized that Black preschoolers are more than 3.6 times as likely to be expelled as white preschoolers. He concluded through his study that teacher perception impacts expulsion and suspension. Dr. Gilliam says that the 3 B's of expulsion risk are being big, being Black, and being a boy. Remember my story about Kyle, my son, big, Black, and a boy. And I assert that these factors persist as students get older and teachers perceive Black boys and Black girls now, especially Black boys, especially as a threat. There is data around the idea that Black boys receive less empathy than white children and often perceived as culpable, older, and less likely to feel pain. Think about how all these factors, all these biases impact instruction. These biases set the foundation for the school to prison pipeline. The term microaggression was coined by African-American Harvard psychiatrist Chester Pierce. According to Dr. Daryl Wing Su, who amplified the term, microaggressions are brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. There are 3 types of microaggressions. Microassaults, those are explicit racial denigrations. Microinvalidations, exclusion, negation, or the nullification of experiences of people of color. And microinsults, insensitivity or demeaning communication regarding a person's racial heritage. Some examples of microaggressions in the classroom are setting low expectations for students from particular groups, neighborhoods, or feeder patterns. When you hear teachers say those kids can't learn because they come from a certain neighborhood. Expecting students of any particular group to represent the perspectives of all of their race, gender, etc. in class discussions or debates. That one black girl is going to represent every black person across the country or in the class. Making assumptions about students and their backgrounds. Complimenting non-white students on their use of good English. Ooh, you speak really well for a black girl. So this is a really quick activity. If you would take your phone and just scan the QR code, this activity would ask that you would read each statement and sort them into two categories, microaggression or no microaggression. And we're not going to take a lot of time to do this, but I would ask that you scan just to see what the activity is like. And this is a great activity to do with educators, and it can also be adapted to do with students. And it's good really to do with anyone because it really helps you to understand what microaggressions are. And microaggressions are really like, I don't even like to use the word micro because they're aggressions. They hurt and they impact people of color greatly. So to educate teachers and sometimes change the mindset of novice educators, educational leaders associated with teacher education must focus on implementing coaching practices that facilitate anti-racist and equitable education practices. It is essential that teacher practices in the classroom support culturally relevant pedagogy. Therefore, teachers must implement instruction and use a curriculum that honors and values students of color, which in turn will support the academic success and growth of all students. And although pre-service teachers and novice teachers have the desire and the need to learn how to navigate classrooms with diverse student populations, pre-service teacher programs are not providing pre-service teachers with the knowledge to implement culturally relevant pedagogy. To further my own knowledge about what novice teachers know about culturally relevant teaching, I engaged in a study using a sample of teachers to examine novice educators' use of culturally relevant teaching practices with students of color. This was part of my dissertation. This was my dissertation. My research revealed the following themes. Teachers had a lack of familiarity with the phrase culturally relevant pedagogy. They were unprepared to meet the challenges of classroom teaching with a diverse group of students. They felt ineffective as culturally relevant pedagogy practitioners. They felt challenged by curriculum constraints. Students exemplified cultural bias toward other students, and teachers just simply didn't know how to implement culturally relevant pedagogy. So interviewing these teachers and studying their narratives was the impetus for me to develop the culturally relevant coaching framework. It became evident that the teachers want to implement culturally relevant teaching, but do not know how. So this is the culturally relevant coaching framework. The 6 C's of the culturally relevant coaching framework are based on the practices and beliefs of Gloria Ladson-Billings and Geneva Gay. You, of course, want to facilitate academic success, put students on the road to academic excellence by fostering high expectations that cultivate academic growth. You want to develop cultural competence. Students must know and experience their culture and the culture of others through windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. You want to foster critical thinking that will disrupt racism and inequity. It's important to provide teachers with the tools to engage students in learning tasks that challenge students to question the status quo and become agents of change. The culturally relevant coaching framework I develop and use encompasses the essential elements of an effective instructional coaching through the lens of equity and anti-racism. Consider the 6 C's of the culturally relevant coaching framework: commonalities and connections, constructs and competencies, and consciousness and critical thinking. The first part of the framework, building community, is to develop a feeling of fellowship with teachers by starting with self-awareness and discovering commonalities in terms of experiences, attitudes, interests, cultural beliefs, and goals. Community fosters trust. Trust allows you to build deep connections. To build a community of learners, have students explore their own identities, do activities that allow children to share who they are. Making connections and finding commonalities with peers fosters that positive classroom environment that exemplifies respect and care. Making connections with teachers fosters high expectations and academic success. Rita Pearson says, kids don't learn from people they don't like. The second aspect of the framework, building knowledge, is essential because as a culturally relevant educator, it is critical to be knowledgeable in pedagogy, instructional strategies, content, and the social constructs associated with equity and anti-racism. As an educator, you must engage in your own learning about the impact of racism on children of color. Educate yourself about the cultural heritage of the children you teach. Finally, to build change, the coach must prompt the educator to change their practices and be an agent of change by providing the impetus for self-reflection through data in the area of race and equity, as well as the tools to implement equitable and anti-racist instructional practices. It is essential that the coach engages the teacher in critical thinking about how to disrupt racist practices in the curriculum and instruction. As a final thought, I would like to emphasize that to address educational disparities and the importance of diversity in the curriculum and instruction, educators must consider windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors in terms of literacy and other learning areas. These terms, coined by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop about books, reminds us that books and other educational resources should be windows that allow us to look through and see other cultures, sliding doors that allow us to enter the world of another culture, and mirrors where children see reflections of themselves. So just to summarize, to address educational disparities through culturally relevant teaching practices, teachers must self-interrogate and examine their own identity and core beliefs. Educators must build relationships with students, acknowledge, address, and dismantle white supremacy in the curriculum, disrupt racist practices and speech, think about microaggressions, engage in real and courageous and deep, not surface level, conversations about race, address implicit bias, keep instruction student-centered, employ restorative justice practices, and recognize that equity and anti-racist work is not employing a set of activities or having a diversity PD day. It is a commitment to changing your mindset through education and accountability. So as an educator, I want to leave you with a little homework. First, thank a teacher. It has been a tough year for all teachers as they instruct during COVID-19 and address their trauma from the pandemic. And for teachers of color, be mindful of the added stress of racism. And this, I just want to read this quote very quickly. So welcome to the team, educators who are on board for the fight for racial justice. We truly hope that you are here for the movement and not for the moment. Reflect and ponder about what action you will take to advance and foster diversity, equity, and anti-racism in education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holliday, for those informative words. I want to emphasize the importance of primary education on the decreasing the inequity gap. Currently in Fort Bend County, there's only one organization, Phi Beta Sigma, I have to give you a shout out, that has a signed MOU with Fort Bend County. This was shocking to me, and we asked the district, did any other organization have any kind of mentoring program with students in Fort Bend County? And she said we were the only ones, and thanks to Dr. Carolyn Holliday, she helped facilitate us finally getting that signed MOU just this week from Fort Bend County. I also, leading into the next speaker, Dr. Kendra Thurman, I want to give you two facts here. Inequity starts early. Ronald Ferguson, director of the Harvard University Achievement Gap Initiative, states that achievement gap starts as young as 2 years old. This places an important emphasis on parental and early childhood education. So in Boston, they've started a program called the Boston Basics, in which they're teaching parents things that you would think they would already know, like to read to their kids, stress importance of education at an early age. Now I'm going to lead you with a math fact leading into Dr. Thurman. From 2002 to 2017, of the roughly 50,000 people who earned PhDs each year, the percentage who were Black only recently modestly increased from 5.1% to 5.4%. So 2,700 out of the 50,000 PhDs went to Black people. According to the data from the National Science Foundation, in 2017, there were more than a dozen fields, largely subfields within science, technology, engineering, and math, in which not a single doctorate degree was awarded to a Black person anywhere in the United States. So STEM education, math education starts early. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kendra Thurman. Dr. Thurman is a mathematics consultant with 18 years of educational experience. She holds a doctorate degree in professional leadership and mathematics education. Her personal philosophy is to develop a collaborative environment created around growth mindset that engages all stakeholders as an active partner in building strong relationships. Also, structured quality instruction to ensure the success of every student in obtaining conceptual knowledge through real-world connections and critical thinking. She has served as a mathematics teacher, mathematics coach, and district mathematics coordinator within the state of Texas. She currently works for a mathematics educational technology company where she partners with district leaders on utilizing the program to inform classroom instruction. Dr. Thurman brings her philosophy to life by researching best practices and facilitating professional learning to equip educators with proficiencies that not only promote a deeper understanding of mathematics, but also provides essential skills to become leaders and stewards of great instruction that incorporate culturally relevant pedagogy and growth mindset. Dr. Thurman, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Holliday, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this webinar today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, there you go. So everything that Dr. Holliday has talked about up to this point has really set the foundation for what I'm going to discuss. Part of my research that I've done with my doctoral dissertation has been around growth mindset, and it's something that I have a strong passion about. But just from my experiences and the research that I've come across, I've noticed that culturally responsive teaching and growth mindset go hand in hand. So you may be wondering why the package here with the picture. It's really because it's something that goes together. It's a package deal. And hopefully by the end of this discussion, you'll be able to see how the two mesh together. So here I want to start off by defining growth mindset. In a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are just the starting point. So this view creates a love of learning and a resilience that is essential for great accomplishment. So basically what this says is that growth mindset is really someone who can, hold on a minute. Sorry, I have kids here, so I'm trying to make sure he's not here. I apologize about that. So in a growth mindset, we're basically saying that if you put forth the effort and you really try hard and you believe in what you can do, you're going to have more success than versus if you believe that you only have certain capabilities and that you can't go further than where you're at. And so this is something that I've really wanted to explore more as I've gotten into education and really just working with kids across the years. And I've really found that it does speak to how much you're going to put forth and how much effort you're going to have to whether you've been successful. But as I've continued throughout this, I've noticed that it's not just about your thinking, it's also about what your experience is and your environment plays a part in. So, from my personal experience, as Dr. Keith Holliday talked about my philosophy, I really want to make sure that I embed those constructs around not thinking that you can't do something, but that you can do something. So, anytime that you're trying to figure out, hey, this is too hard for me, or something that I'm really struggling with, having the insight to know that I can do. It's just I can't do it yet. And I really learned with working with educators that this is something that we have to help them understand to embed into the classroom as well. For my doctoral dissertation, what I did was I got a chance to partner with my advisor and experience what his classroom looked like with him implementing growth mindset strategies. And I found that through that research that the teachers or the pre-service teachers were able to get a more um, love, increase their love of mathematics and what it could look like inside of the classroom, and just really understanding that the things that they may have experienced in the past didn't necessarily equate to what that looks like in their classroom. Oftentimes, when educators come into math as their profession, especially with my primary teachers, they tend to shy away from it and get a little scared about how can I present this because I'm not good at math or I've never been good at math and really didn't understand it. So how can I teach my students? And so it was really interesting to see that their shift increased towards being more of a growth mindset when it came to mathematics education along the lines of the different types of resources and the different types of tasks that they were given within the actual classroom. But the one thing that I started to wonder as I look back on what that research looked like, as well as what I've done with professional learning with some of my educators, is how did that translate to the students? How did the students take whatever things that they were doing and really increase their learning from it? I don't think that the pre service teachers really had the opportunity to explore what that looked like if they come across students who may or may not believe that they can do something, not because they don't hear what they're saying, but more because of the environments that they're in. And that has really just been something that they have not seen success in. And they don't see within the curriculum or see within education anybody that looks like them that can do it. So why should I listen to what you're saying and believe it? And so something that I read from Carol Dweck is something that aligns with what I was kind of thinking myself. What has started to happen the more that we've explored this concept of growth mindset in education is that it's becoming more of a band-aid almost to help with self-esteem. I'm going to praise you whether you're learning or not. I'm going to keep saying, yes, good job. You don't know it yet, but you'll eventually do it. Keep doing it. But we're not checking in to see if our students are learning or if they really understand it. We aren't making connections to help them see that they can be and that they can learn based off of what they see within the curriculum. It's also starting to shift the blame from, they can't do it because they're in this type of environment or they're in this type of household. We're starting to shift it more to they have a fixed mindset. They just can't learn. There's nothing that they can do. And that they becomes very powerful in the actions, or excuse me, becomes very evident in the actions that are done within the classroom itself. And so thinking about that also perpetuates that notion of almost having a false growth mindset with educators. They tend to say, I have a growth mindset. I do these things in the classroom. I have up my posters that say the power of yet, or don't think of it this way, think of it this way, but their actions are saying something different. As we continue to move into exploring what that curriculum looks like, we've noticed that some of the things that happen within any classroom, not just the math classroom, are structures that hinder a lot of our students who are at risk, who are Black, Hispanic, person of color, with things such as tracking, where you're trying to almost put a glass ceiling to who can go into these advanced courses, who is able to go into here, because a lot of times they're educator educators who go in and actually recommend who should be available to go into those courses. We also see that independent practice is given over teamwork. So where we're trying to say, okay, this student needs to practice more. I'm going to hold you after school, or you need this tutoring, but you aren't giving the opportunities within the classroom itself to really show that all students can be successful. And there are a whole bunch of other examples, but just really trying to see how educators can say one thing, but their actions can mean another is also something that we're starting to see around the conversation about growth mindset. So there were two things that really have popped up recently for me that have challenged me to kind of reevaluate what I think of when I hear the terms growth mindset. And so I'm going to read this to you. It seems pretty lengthy, but I just wanted to read it so that you could really grasp the overall or the overarching theme around what this is saying. It says, if educators teaching growth mindset do not take young people's environment into account, particularly youth experiencing white supremacy, anti-Blackness, poverty, patriarchy, and ableism, then they are engaging in glorified victim blaming. Educators should remember that Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience systemic oppression and are more likely to develop a fixed mindset because they are far more likely to be punished for their mistakes. So it's not that we need to go in and we need to say all of these things in terms of you can't do it yet, or let's think about how we can move forward if we keep trying and if we put forth effort. We need to stop and take a reflective thought back, a reflective look back on how we are saying, hey, if you can't do this, then you aren't capable. You aren't able to do it. And in your mind and what you're thinking is reflected in what's going on in your classroom. We really have to take a look at what the experiences our students are bringing into the classroom and how we can help shine a light on pushing past some of those things that may be a barrier or a hindrance for them. Oftentimes they'll come into the classroom as students and are scared or are not or do not feel safe to put forth the effort because they have experiences that have said before, anytime that I do it, I get punished for it, or I'm laughed at, or I'm told that I can't do, or I'm not shown the same success or the same opportunities as some of my other counterparts. Because students will know what teachers say about these particular students that are showing success. So these are my good students, even if they don't come out and say, these are my good students. So just taking the opportunity to think more about how growth mindset connects to cultural relevancy really spoke to me in how we need to think more about just saying it's the power of yet. I'm also reading a book with the company that I work with, my team. We are reading The Art of Possibility. And from this, there are some themes that have come out that have made me really reflect on what growth mindset looks like in terms of connecting with cultural relevancy as well. The first one is to recognize that there are other perspectives. Shift what you personally accept as true. So we have our own set of thoughts, we have our own set of perspectives, our own set of beliefs that we think are truth because of what we've experienced or what we've seen around us. But we have to recognize that just because somebody says something and you don't necessarily believe it, it doesn't mean that it's not true. It's about taking the opportunity to recognize that these perspectives are based on what they have experienced and what they have endured as well. And so recognizing that our students are coming with these same types of experiences that may differ from us. As Dr. Holliday pointed out earlier, majority of the educators in the education system are white. However, majority of the students are minorities and at risk. And the cultural responsiveness there oftentimes is misaligned because there isn't an opportunity for the educators to really take that opportunity to understand where the students are coming from, what their experiences are, and how they can connect to the instruction that's being given. We also need to reflect on what is the instruction that's being given. Is it something that shows the opportunities that we want to present to students to really see themselves within that and see that they can be successful in whatever they're doing? The second one is mind the mind needs to recreate the narrative and retrain itself based on its adaptability, its ability to adapt to new facts. So as you start to gain these perspectives and these new truths, allow your mind to start to recreate that narrative. Don't just stop and think, okay, this is the only way. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but never mind what you're saying. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Are we really helping our students to grow and be true to themselves without having to change who they are because we're only giving them what we know as true? And so that really takes the opportunity once again to explore what that curriculum looks like, how we're embedding those different microaggressions within our education system, and how we're playing a role with hindering them through some of those constructs, such as tracking and focusing on just independent work and saying, make sure you show your work when we talk about math and not giving them the opportunity to explore their own thinking. And then the last one is that every story you tell is founded on a network of hidden assumptions. It's all invented. So there's something that you may assume that you don't necessarily know that you have an assumption of that is driving what's happening within your classroom. So taking a step back and reflecting on what are those hidden assumptions? What do I think about these particular students, or what do I think about this set of ideas that are coming across in my instruction that are hindering my students from being successful? With all of that said, this is how we need to kind of stretch ourselves to help us get out of this comfort zone. It is scary to want to stay where you're at. It's scary to explore and try to see how you're going to help support your students within the classroom, but it's something that we need to do. We have to take that step forward. And it's not going to be something that you're going to be successful at the first time you do it, but each time you do it, you're going for that ultimate goal of helping your students be successful in their own truth and helping them understand how they can be reflected in what's going on and how their how their education can continue to reflect on who they can be in the future. So I wanted to give just a few things to help you as an educator be able to do that a little bit more easily. The first one is to explore your own perspective. And these are in no particular order. Oftentimes, you may hear when it talks about growth mindset or cultural responsive pedagogy that you want to reflect on your own biases first. You don't necessarily have to do that first, but you do have to make it a point to put that as part of the pathway to help you become a more culturally responsive educator. So in order to explore your perspective, think about how your actions may reinforce inequalities. Think about how you may easily blame students for things that are happening within the classroom that may or may not be because of what they know. It may be something that is because of experiences that they've had. It may be because of something that's within the curriculum itself that's hindering them from being successful. Oftentimes, when we are in the classroom, we lack an understanding of the impacts that affect students. So, what's going on in the community? What's going on in their household? What's going on for them personally to help them be more successful in the classroom? Sometimes those hindrances are the things that are lacking. And you can't just come in and say, oh, let's have a growth mindset and let's increase the power of yet in that conversation without first looking at what's going on with the students. So connecting with them and really understanding who they are. Don't put the faults on your students. And then oftentimes that leads to remediation. And those are things that are also constructs that hinder our students from being successful. We think that, oh, because the student can't do, then I'm going to put you in remediation and you need to go back and you need to learn more about this. And oftentimes that happens when you're pulling them outside of school and you're giving them extra homework and extra practice, when in reality, it may be we need to go in and actually look at the curriculum that we're putting out and the different instructional practices that we're using to see how we can help make sure they're successful. We don't want to pigeonhole a certain group of students and say, oh, you're not able to do, so I'm only going to do this particular high level task or something with this group of students and put you in remediation. Yes, we want to differentiate, but we want to make sure that we're not hindering them and putting a ceiling over them because we feel like it's their fault and that we have these implicit biases that are hindering us from connecting with them and seeing how they can also be successful as well. We talked a little bit about adjusting your instructional practice. So it really is about providing opportunities, giving them a chance and not changing them. We don't want to say, As for example, in math, we don't want to say that as a math student, you can only do it this way. I don't care how you may think about it and how you may want to go in and explore this problem. It has to be this way, this set of procedures. That's not giving them the opportunity to explore what math can be and how they can build connections and really understand the true beauty of mathematics itself. But it's also about in your classroom giving them and providing those opportunities by using inquiry-based instruction and high-level tasks. We want them to be able to explore what's happening in there, give them opportunities to see what math looks like in any subject, really not just math, but what it looks like within the classroom that reflects them. Bring in some of those different career personnel who can talk about what it looks like in the real world. Help them explore by giving them opportunities with a problem that is like, okay, let's see, this is something that's going on in your community. How can we connect this to what's happening with what we're learning in the actual classroom? Also, having those open-ended discussions is powerful. It allows the students to voice what they see and what they know and bring their own experience to the table. We can't just always be teacher led and be that sage on the stage where we're telling them exactly what needs to happen, because once again, that's trying to change who they are. We're putting them in this box, in this bubble that says, you have to be this way. And if you're not this way, you can't be successful. Well, we need to allow them to stretch and see what they can do and be able to learn and start to learn that they can be successful and have those different opportunities to see that. And then, of course, reflective practice. Allow them to go in and reflect on the things that they're learning, reflect on how it connects with them, reflect on how it can be connected in the real world, and how all of those things benefit and show how they can continue to move forward and be successful across the future. Build relationships. So it's not just about learning the culture, it's also about breaking the barriers. So we don't want it to be where you're saying, okay, today we're going to learn about this particular culture and we're going to highlight what's happening in the Hispanic communities, or we're going to highlight what's happening in the Black communities. It's also about breaking the barriers. What are the things that are hindering your students from being successful? So that's part of you building relationships with not only the students, but with the community, with the families, with the rest of your school, and really seeing what things are hindering your students. How can I take that out of the way and help them be successful? So whether that's you and what you're doing in your own instruction, are you providing assessments that have limited ability for the students to really showcase their knowledge, and then if they get it wrong, you're saying, oh, they don't know it? Or are you giving them opportunities to be open-ended and show these thought processes and taking that into account and really seeing how much they know and what their knowledge is, and then moving from there? Are you tracking your students? Are you giving them that track that says, these are my tier 1 students, my students who are doing great, and so I'm going to continue to do this and push them further and give them all these high level tasks. But these students over here, these are the ones that are struggling, so I'm only going to give them the basics. They can't do anything else. I want them to be successful. That's that microaggression. This is me saying that they can only be successful if I give them this low level opportunity. So really trying to push through and seeing what are those barriers that are occurring to help in order to hinder them from being successful. And make sure it's authentic and genuine. Don't just do it just because this is what I'm supposed to do. Students can tell if you're not authentic with them, if you're not authentic with the opportunities that you're putting out there, they're not going to take it seriously, and they're not going to put forth the effort to try and really make connections and see and be able to see themselves within what you're doing in the classroom. You also want to make sure you're an advocate. If you see something, say something. So if you see some things going on that are not right, that's going on within the actual building, within your actual classroom, within your neighbor or your co-teacher's classroom, say something. If you see that there are high numbers of Black students that are being suspended and high levels of Hispanic students that are being put in a certain classroom, or other students of color that are being put in special ed, but it doesn't seem that it's on the right path, it's aligned to what should be happening, say something. Don't just say, oh, that's not right. Oh, I'm just gonna hide behind this and pretend that it's not going on. Because if you're not an advocate for your students, who else is gonna be? Teach your students to be advocates for themselves as well. That's part of what happens in your instruction. They need to see themselves of what they can be protected in and how they can continue to excel, but they need to be able to acknowledge that and have a voice and say what's going on with them and how they can and what they need to be successful as well. Watch for your own fixed mindset reactions. If something is happening, how do you react to it? Do you immediately say, oh, don't worry about Johnny, he just has all of this stuff going on, I mean, I'm trying with him, but he's never going to make it, so it doesn't matter? Are those things that you constantly do? Are you saying that I'm embedding growth mindset practices within my classroom, but I'm doing something different? Reflect on your practice. See what's going on and see how you are playing a role in what may be happening with your students and how they can't connect and be successful. Listen and acknowledge. So it's not just about hearing what's happening, it's also acknowledging it and then taking that and growing yourself. Okay, I've listened, I've acknowledged. How can I move forward? How can I be a better educator? How can I continue to promote this cultural responsive pedagogy to help support my students and be successful? It really is about you taking that opportunity and exploring what that looks like. Yes, there are supposed to be supports and leadership that can help you, as Dr. Holliday talked about earlier, with coaching and doing the different peer conversations that you can have, but it ultimately lies back with you as well. So take that and embed it inside of yourself with your reflective practices, with your exploration, and really trying to see how you can be more of an ally and an advocate for your students and helping them to grow and be less successful because of barriers that may be intact. And last but not least, reflect. Dr. Maya Angelou, my SOAR, an Alpha Kappa Alpha woman, said it best: do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So no one is perfect, but you're given tools. There are tools out there that you can use to help yourself be better. So take the first step. Take that opportunity to stop and reflect on your own practice and see, are there any microaggressions that I have? Are there any fixed mindset opportunities or fixed mindset instructions that I'm putting within the classroom? Are there any growth mindset opportunities that I'm allowing my students to have? Am I reflective on what's going on with them, the student, the person, to really help them be successful? When you do that, that's going to help you move into that space of being the advocate, of being the reflective practitioner, of adjusting your instructional practices and really understanding your students' needs. These are just a few books that I have in my own personal library that I encourage you to read. If you have not already done so, they can help with that exploration and that reflective practice to help you become a better educator, a more culturally responsive educator, and helping support your students. And that is all that I have.
Outstanding, Dr. Thurman. Just a brief word about barriers. I'll tell everybody a brief story. I was on a phone call with my son's counselor just last week, and I said, he's starting to look at colleges. I need his GPA and class rank so I could get an idea of what types of schools we should be looking at. So the counselor, who just happened to be white, told me that his math grades were low. And I said to myself, I don't remember seeing any low math grades, but I didn't challenge her at that point because I didn't have the documentation in front of me. So after we got off the phone, I looked up my son's math grade and it was 92. So was it a bias on her part to automatically assume that since he was a Black boy that his math grades were low? Also, she was registering him for pre-calc, so why would she think that he had a low math grade? Additionally, she discouraged us from taking an early college class because she said about transportation issues, but she should have just left that decision up to me and my child instead of discouraging me from enrolling him in the early college class. So there's still barriers that exist, and it might be a microaggression. Maybe the lady doesn't even realize that she discouraged a Black male from doing a harder math class. So with that, I want to lead into our next speaker, and I always like to give you a statistic here. From the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. Nationwide, just over 5% of all full-time faculty members in colleges and universities in the United States are Black. The percentage has increased slightly over the past decade, but the percentage of Black faculty at almost all of the nation's high-ranking universities is significantly below the national average of 5.2%. So that includes all of the HBCUs, which we have a higher amount of Black faculty. So Black faculty at universities is still a drop in the bucket, and recruitment of males and men and minority in teaching is still difficult. Next, let me introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jerry Wallace. He is an education and community leader who has 15 years of dedicated experience supporting local ISDs, community colleges, and universities in Southwest Texas. He currently serves full-time as the Assistant Dean for the College of Public Service at the University of Houston downtown, where he's responsible for creating opportunities for student enrollment, academic advisement, retention efforts, supporting graduate programs, and community partnerships. Dr. Wallace coordinates outreach efforts to develop strategies, partnerships with external partners to support career development for students. Additionally, he supports members and faculty in the development of criminal justice, which includes criminal justice, social work, the Department of Urban Education, the Criminal Justice Training Center, and the Center for Public Service and Community Research. Dr. Wallace is the co-founder of the Men of Legacy, Legacy, and Call Me Mr. Collegiate Student Success Programs, the first in the state of Texas that created opportunities for male students of color to become teachers. His efforts work to increase college admissions and enrollment for African American and Hispanic males, which includes collaborating with middle schools, high schools, and community colleges, and establishing partnerships with community agencies, universities, student resources, and academic departments. Dr. Wallace is the co-founder of the Greater Houston Area Men of Color Collegiate Symposium, which hosts more than 500 students and professionals each year. He has partnered with My Brother's Keeper, Positive Black Male, the Ascending the Men Project, HISD, Houston Community College, Men of Honor, and, uh, and others in an effort to dispel the school to prison pipeline. Dr. Wallace is a published scholar, and he has presented at numerous conferences and supported graduate student research in areas centered around social justice, critical race theory, and global and ethical leadership. Dr. Wallace, good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Can everybody hear me well? Give me a thumbs up. Dr. Holliday, Dr. Thurman, you can hear me? Okay, good deal. Glad to be here with everyone this morning. I'm gonna come to you all from a framework where I begin to highlight and show some of the practitioner side of what we've been able to do, specifically engaging with our male students of color. I know sometimes and even often conversations around social justice and equity, sometimes it stems mostly around men of color. We also know that women have also been discriminated in high places and often have not been focused. Individuals have not thought about our female counterparts and not have given them their due justice in time. And what I want to do is I want to highlight specifically some areas that emphasize our men. And I want to even tell you and show you how our women have even supported our programs. Oftentimes you hear about mentoring, you think that well, only a man can mentor a man, or you know, we need to put more men in certain places, which I totally agree with that. But I can just tell you from personal experience, my greatest mentor were two women, my mother and my grandmother. So I think I turned out okay having those two women in my life. But again, we're going to highlight some things specifically around men of color, and we'll go through this here to have an opportunity for you guys to ask me any questions. Okay. So first, we're going to start with a history review to kind of give some insight as to where we are. So Anthony Burns in the mid 1800s was a Black slave preacher. And he was growing up as a slave, born into slavery. And he was in Virginia and he escaped from slavery. He ended up in Boston. And at this time in Boston, he's living out his life. He thinks he's escaped slavery. He's gone up north where slavery up north is not as profound and almost illegal to a certain degree up north. What happens is they find Anthony Burns and they eventually try him in court. So he's in court, and according to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, as you see there, was a part of the Compromise of 1850, and the act required that slaves be returned to their owners, even if they were in a free state, which was Boston, Massachusetts at the time. The act also made the federal government responsible for finding, returning, and trying escaped slaves. So Anthony's there, he's living out his life, he's gone to a free state. I've made it, man, I'm gonna live out my life. And all of a sudden, police officers from Virginia, they come find me. So they try Anthony at court. And the interesting thing about what happens during his trial is that there was actually a court riot. You would think the court riot was maybe themes that you've seen in movies, hang him, kill him, send him back to slavery. You would think that that may have popped up, but it was actually the opposite. There were several individuals in Boston at the time, abolitionists, men from all different races and backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses who were there, and they were actually rioting the courthouse to free him. They bombarded the courthouse and even broke through the front door to try to get Anthony Burns out. And this is surprising during the time of slavery, where you see these individuals who gathered together to basically do their due diligence to free a comrade. This is definitely an act of social justice with those individuals. You can definitely see that. But what happened as the trial moved on is he was not freed. They ended up putting him back in slavery, and he ended up with a master at a plantation, Master McDaniel. And what would happen is he was treated fairly well. They put him in a place where he got to sleep inside, and he was a preacher, so he got to go to church and he got to preach and do some things on the side, and he was treated well, but he was still a slave. Well, one particular day, he's out with the mistress of the home, the master's wife, and they're out in the community doing some things. And there's a lady in the community who recognizes him from pictures or the story. They recognize him and they say, "Hey, that's the guy who fled. That's the guy who at the court they rioted to free him." So she goes and she tells another gentleman, an abolitionist by the name of Leonard Grimes, about Anthony and his situation. So Leonard Grimes negotiates with the Master McDaniel to free Anthony, to purchase him. As you see there, the agreement was $1,300. Today, that's $41,000. Basically, he was gonna pay for Anthony. He's gonna buy a car. That's a high-end car, $40,000. That's a high-end car. That is how much Anthony was worth, and that is how much was paid basically to free him. Later, he would end up in Philadelphia for his first night of freedom, and then going back to Boston. And he would go to college. He went to Oberlin College to attend his degree, to study a degree in divinity. And he lived out his life for the next few years, and he would actually die in 1862 of tuberculosis. So he was only in his early 30s. But his story is very interesting because first and foremost, the fact that you see in 1850 or around that time or another, you specifically have a social justice movement in a particular community where individuals are rioting, tearing down a courthouse to save a Black man, to create opportunities for him, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives. The history lesson tells us that, you know, the officers at the courthouse had guns, they had, you know, their bayonets, and they were ready to hurt or kill anyone who was coming into the courthouse. Very interesting because if you've been paying attention to the news, that recently happened here in at our Capitol. So won't go in detail about that, but you all know that. But it's interesting because this is a fight specifically for a Black male. It's also interesting in this story that there was $40,000 spent on this one guy to get him free. And then he would ultimately end up in an educational opportunity, completing his college degree during a time where Blacks, of course, could not go to school, were not afforded the opportunity, they were slaves. Why is this history relevant? We are 150 years or plus later, and we are still seeing images like this. These are a few snapshots of what it looked like during the time that was in local news, during the time of, you know, if you were an escaped slave, or should I say a convict, there's a reward out for you. There are signs posted in the newspaper, which was there, what we call our social media today, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or what have you. This is their social media back then. And in this first image here, there's a $150 reward for an escaped slave. And there's a depiction that describes specifically what this person is, what they look like, and even the skill sets that they have. It says specifically, it says, and is a first-rate dining room servant, and when it was in a tavern in Louisville for 18 months. It's really highlighting, you know, he's a good cook, and it's telling you the worth of this slave. The next image there says caution colored people. And this is something that Anthony would have seen during his time, is, hey, be careful, colored people. There are slave masters coming. There are policemen coming to Boston, trying to capture you, trying to get you. Be careful, be mindful, because if they get you, whether you're free or not, they're gonna take you back to the South. If you've all seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, that is exactly what happened in that movie. Solomon is having a conversation with some white gentlemen that he think are there for his well-being, and eventually they drug him. He drinks some alcohol that puts him to sleep, and he wakes up and finds himself on his way downriver. It's interesting that we look at these images and we're having this conversation today in 2021, because this same conversation is happening. You're seeing issues where we're saying, this is what our Black males, our Hispanic males, I definitely want to highlight them as well. This is what they look like. These are the issues that they're going through. They're at risk. You know, they can only do these things. Be mindful, we're going to put you in these resource classes. We're going to put you in programs where you're not going to be prepared for college level rhetoric. You're not going to get an opportunity to do dual credit, or you're not qualified enough, even as I heard both Dr. Hollidays mention, even as it impacts their children, not getting those opportunities. So how do we work together collectively as leaders to fight against that? What are some things that we can actually move toward to put into practice? And I'm going to highlight later the asset-based thinking versus the deficit-based thinking. Because even quite often as researchers and practitioners, we often look at the issues and the challenges and we dwell on that. It's important for us to highlight some best practices to say, okay, what can we do? Don't tell me what I can't do. Don't tell me what I already know. Don't tell me what I've been seeing for 150, 200 years. What can I do today? Number one, I want to highlight two programs that we've done at the University of Houston downtown that have partnered with various organizations and school districts. The Men of Legacy program was the first program we started almost 6 years ago now. And Legacy stands for Leadership, Excellence, Grades, Access, Collaboration, and Identity. And this program emphasized, and this is at the collegiate level, but this program emphasized an opportunity to directly partner with the school district and recruit Black and Hispanic males from their local high schools or even their community colleges into this program, and they will be placed in all male core courses during their first few years in college. So if they're taking English, history, math, seminar course, specifically critical race studies, which we're going to talk about in a minute, we can place them in these courses. The Call Me Mr. program started this past year. It was in partnership with Clemson University and Houston Independent School District, and we're continuously building partnerships with other districts. Call Me Mr. program specifically highlights men of color who want to get degrees in teacher education. Clemson University founded this program 20 plus years ago now, and they have various other institutions across South Carolina and other states that have partnered with this. And again, the emphasis is how do we get men of color to go into the teaching fields and put them back into K-12 and allow them to be professional teachers and mentors along the way. The Summer House Institute is a partnership we've developed with two good brothers, good men out of Philadelphia. And they have actually started this foundation where they actually go and they do mentorship for men who desire to be teachers. It is a research institute. It's about a 3-week summer institute, and they go to different communities and cities and do it. And this summer, they're coming to Houston. So we've tagged young men who are either seniors in high school getting ready to graduate, all the way up through the collegiate age through senior in college. And these men partner with various student mentors who may be young men currently in school who are graduates, graduate students earning their master's or doctorate degrees in education. They partner with leaders, faculty mentors, superintendents and principals. And this Summer House Institute brings in curriculum development, pedagogy, critical race theory concepts, social justice mindsets, mentoring components into a 3-week seminar that these young men go through to be able to understand how to overcome microaggressions, to gain skills and insight on how to be a better and more effective teacher for all students, as well as the mentoring continues. It's not just a 3-week thing. It continues all the way through until these young men graduate, and it also works to help them get jobs in K-12. There's a stipend here. These young men get a stipend for participating, so there is an incentive, and this organization is partnered with several foundations that supports this. So what I want to highlight is how are we able to get this done? Some people are like, oh man, this is awesome, this is great, I've never heard of this, but how were you able to get that done? So a couple of things. Whenever I got to U of H downtown a few years ago, the aspect was how do we begin to build this pathway for our men of color? How do we reach back into K-12? How do we begin to paint these positive images of men of color? Because again, as I showed you earlier, we've seen too many images of negative concepts of men of color, and that's a whole nother conversation about what's on our TVs today, what you hear in our music, but even the mindset of what other ethnicities and other genders see. Their perceptions then become of what they think of us based on what they see. So the big part of that is I had to develop a relationship with the schools. That was a big piece of it. So that meant going into the schools, meeting with leaders, asking them what is their vision for their men of color, asking them specifically to look at their data, how many of their men of color are transitioning in and through college, how many men of their color, men of color who are first generation, what are their test scores, whether they're in middle school or high school, what's the trajectory? And of course, you've all heard, concerns in K-12 about reading and writing skills and math skills, et cetera. But what I often find, in my personal experience, most of our young men do not have issues academically. The issue that I have found is they do not feel authentic in classrooms. They cannot be their authentic selves, right? How can Mike, how can Chad walk in class and feel comfortable wearing his cornrows, having his afro out, wearing his Jordans or his LeBrons and not be judged? How can the teachers, the principals, the administrators look at him as this is the culture, this is what kids are, this is how they dress, this is how they look, but the kid is smart. How can they look past his physical appearance and be able to speak directly to his mind? So what I do is I go into schools and I get an opportunity to sit into classrooms and I watch how teachers teach. And I listen to conversations in the hallways and trust me, I was intimidated. I hadn't been in a school in a while, and I started going in and I'm in the hallway and the bell rings and it's 1,000 kids in the hallway. And these kids, some of these kids are bigger than me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And it took me back to my high school days but I'm sitting in class and I'm looking at the body language of our young men. They're slouching in their chairs. They got their headphones in. One young man I remember had his headphones in kind of on the side and he's not really paying attention. And, one of them got his phone under the table. He texting, he on Instagram, and I'm watching. I'm not saying anything. But I pulled one of the young brothers aside and I asked him, I said, man, what do you think about that class? And at first he didn't want to tell me the truth. So I had to talk to him straight. I'm gonna talk to y'all straight, kinfolk. I'm gonna talk to y'all straight. And I said, I talked to him like when I talked to my little brothers. I said, say fam, how did you feel about that class? And he says, you know what? Your teacher's talking too fast. I don't see anybody there in those books, in those on the walls that look like me. I'm coming from a community, and I'm paraphrasing what he's telling me. I'm coming from a community where I don't see this in my neighborhood. And I really just want to play ball. And I'm just, this teacher's not really connecting with me. So I began to go into the classrooms and I told the college readiness personnel and I got with the principals and I say, hey, I want to come in to develop this pathway, but I really have to touch the soul and mind of these young men. And as I do this, I want teachers to come in and watch me do it. I said, because there's one thing for me to go over practices and curriculum with teachers, which has its place, and that's good information that they need to go through. But it's another thing for them to see me do it. So this is actually an image that you see me. I'm in a classroom and I'm talking to my Hispanic brothers. And this school I was at is mostly Hispanic school, but I'm there with our brothers and I'm talking to them straight. And we're actually going through a college application that day. And they're logged into their computers and we're going through the college application and I'm showing them not just the application, but we start looking up jobs. We start looking at careers. I show them what jobs require different type of degrees. And I then backtrack and I say, well, this is how this relates to your history class. Let's talk about math. Let's talk about your English class. Let's talk about why you should be taking pre-cal right now, right? This is how it's going to impact if you want to be an engineer. And you see a lot of aha moments on their faces. There's teachers that you don't see in this image, and I've done this multiple times, and the teachers are having aha moments. And they're coming back to me and they're saying, man, Dr. Wallace, like I was looking at it totally different. I wasn't really showing the students how what we're teaching in high school or middle school is really going to transition into a career path, right? We're teaching the test. You know, I have to go through the curriculum and the syllabus. And I told him, I said, I totally understand that. You know, I get what you're trying to do. You're not wrong in sticking to your syllabus. I said, but what you need to understand is our young men, I need practicality. I need to be able to see what this transitions into, right? You can't sit here and talk to me about history and it's 250 years ago and be like, okay, I'm 17. What does this mean to me right now, right? So there were a lot of aha moments for those teachers. So as I began to develop those opportunities for those teachers to be able to come in and watch, it was also an opportunity to influence these young men. And what would also happen as this partnership developed with these school districts is I would bring colleagues in, men and women, Hispanic, African-American men and women, our white counterparts. There was a diversity of faculty, and even our current students would come and they would participate in these sessions over time. And we would have parent workshops. I had a good colleague, Hispanic gentleman, came and did a Spanish-speaking workshop for me and our parents of these young men. And what really happened is I developed a connection with these young men. And you see there's an image there of Balthazar in the middle. As our guys move through, at the end of the year, we would take them to a career expo. So if they're in high school, we would always partner with, of course, our university, and we would say, hey, we're going to go to this career expo. We would get with the high school and say, hey, do you have some buses or whatnot? Can you provide? Or if not, we had a budget to be able to do that. And we would take our young men to a career expo, and they would get an opportunity to actually see leadership in action. And this was actually at George R. Brown, and we got our guys fitted. You see, they got their suits on, their suits on, and they look professional because we realize and recognize a lot of our young men never put on a suit, don't know how to tie a tie. They don't understand how it looks. And we were able to partner. I'm a member of the 100 Black Men in Houston, and we were able to partner with them. And one of our brothers actually had a suit closet, and he donated over 100 suits. So we were able to get our guys fitted. So I want to highlight again instructional academic support. I mentioned earlier that whenever we recruit our young men out of high school and we build these partnerships and they come to the program, during our first 2 years, my colleague who's pictured there, Dr. Vida Robertson, I always want to highlight and recognize him. We were able to build academic cohorts for our young men as they come in. We built a relationship with them in the school district, whether it's middle school through high school. We keep this pathway going. We touch them every year. They become seniors. They graduate high school. We have our orientations, our sessions for those guys. And then Dr. Robertson, myself, and several other colleagues, there's a lot of other people who support this, partner with us to create these courses, academic core courses at the collegiate level that they have to take anyway. So this is a part of their core curriculum. And these young men get put into these courses going into their freshman year. And as you see the image to the right, that's an actual image of our guys who are part of an all-male class, and they're actually engaging in scholarly research. There was a research institute that came to talk to our guys specifically about their experiences in our university and in this program. So they came to class, they're talking to our guys about this, and this gives our students an opportunity to engage and participate in their own research. Dr. Robertson does a really good job taking our young men to different conferences and leadership expos where they present research at the collegiate level as an undergraduate, and they get to actually talk about what their professions look like, and they get to use that research in their class. We have a critical race theories course, which is a part of the social science component. We were able to get that course core approved. So if you know anything about the college level in higher education, you have a subset of core classes that students must take. Critical race studies at the time was a social science course, but we wanted to get it core approved, so it was a requirement on their degree plan. We were able to get that done. So critical race studies, basically the social justice construct course, they take that class. You also see, you heard me mention earlier, We also partner with our young ladies. There's an image there of our young lady who's there. She's actually one of our program mentors. So we have our young ladies who actually participate in this program, and they benefit from it as well. Now, I want to highlight some specific things because this is just a general format of the program, and kind of I want to talk about some challenges that we had and kind of where we are now, and to try to give you some tips on what you can do in your area. First and foremost, the first 3 bullets there is just a general overview. Data informs practice. So I would highly encourage that you go look at the National Center for Education and Stats, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and TEA. Go and look at those websites if you've never done it before, and I want you to really go and look at the data that is published in the state of Texas and nationally, and you can sift through the data. It's a lot of information there, which is good. You can sift through the information, and you can basically understand and know where our young men are, whether it's K through 12 or in higher ed, in relation to their grades. You can look at it by district, you can look at it by school, you can look at it by university, college, etc. Some information is disaggregated and some information is not. And that's good if it's not disaggregated to an extent, because that means there's a question for you to answer. You need to go back to your administration and your leadership and say, I need disaggregated data, okay? I want to emphasize asset thinking versus deficit thinking. This goes back to whether you're in K-12 or in higher ed, and any person can benefit from this, is that first and foremost, we really want to highlight the strengths of our young men. One of my students, I also work as a graduate instructor for doctoral students, and one of my students, I want to highlight her, Jessica Thompson-Fowler, did a really good job in her dissertation study where she emphasized asset thinking versus deficit thinking. And a big piece of her study that she was able to produce was quite often when we look at data, when we look at trends where young men are in, constantly truant or in detention, juvenile detention centers, or in the principal's office, et cetera, when we look at math scores and we see lower math scores or lower reading scores, we tend to emphasize and focus on the deficits so much so that we begin to create discouraging language even for the community and our young men. She emphasizes in her study even the terms we use, and we're all guilty of it, when we talk about minority, when we talk about at risk. We may talk about that collectively as professionals in our circles, but quite often we use those same terms with our students. And this concept of minority becomes so negative, it becomes so heavy for our young men that they begin to think, I will always be a minority, because even the success program I'm in tells me that I'm a minority. It tells me that I'm at risk. A big piece of how we developed our programs was to really emphasize the pride of what it means to be a man of color, and coming from your community. All the images that we put up are all images of our guys literally being successful. That doesn't mean we're gonna have all our guys in our program are 4.0 students. We got guys who have 3.8s and 2.1s in the program. Why is that important? I don't want a young man who has a 2.3 to think that he's less than the student that has a 3.8. Because what will happen is he will never see himself with the ability to achieve, right? I also heard a colleague you just heard mention earlier from one of our panelists said, don't lower the standard. Don't lower the standard, right? I do not lower the standard for our guys. If I got a guy who's a 3.8, guess what? He's gonna mentor the guy who's a 2.1. We're gonna get this young man up to par. So this is what we do at the collegiate level. We begin to make sure that everything that we do focuses on the asset mindset. Let's focus on their strength. Let's focus on those positive affirmations, right? I have a son, and sometimes I have to give him tough words, but I follow that tough word up with some love. You know, hey, look, baby boy. Hey, look, now I need you. Daddy needs you to come on. Daddy needs you to come on now, make that, Now I say, but you know what? Daddy proud of you. Daddy love you. Daddy proud of you. Give me a hug. All right, come on, let's go. How do we have teach our teachers, teach our young men? How do we influence our communities to have positive affirmations? And I'm even saying this to the Black community, right? I've been in communities of my own where we talk so bad to our young men, to our young women, to where they don't believe in themselves. So this mindset of asset thinking also translates to the collegiate or ISD level when you talk about administrators. Because in order to move a program forward in any initiative, whether you want to develop teacher mindset, whether you want to develop a program of success for men of color at your school or in your community, you actually have to have administrator buy-in. Administrators gotta be in on it, right? Now you may say, well, I've done this before. I've reached out to my administrators and they're not hearing me. Well, here are a few suggestions to be able to do that. Let's just say you want to target a school district and you say, hey, we need programs in elementary schools that specifically target our boys, or at middle school, at high school. I would highly encourage you to attend local town halls if that school district hosts those. If they have town hall meetings, or if they have board meetings that's open to the public, that's an opportunity for you to attend those, right? And be able to speak your piece on that subject. I've been at several, and here's what I want to tell us. When you go in, don't just go in and talk. Go in with some data, okay? Pull the data. Go in with a proposal, okay? If you don't know how to make a proposal, you don't know how to pull data, get with somebody that does, okay? You need to talk to administrators in a language that they understand. Now I'm talking to y'all straight right now. I'm talking to y'all like we family, right? But I also have to make sure that I'm presenting myself whenever I talk to administrators in a language that they understand. And that language is data. That language is strategic plan. That language is strategic goals, outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. That's that language. How does it impact enrollment, student success initiatives? How does it impact policy and practice? That's the language that administrators understand. So if you go to a town hall, and I'm speaking specifically to ISDs, if you want to talk to a principal, to a superintendent, you need to go in there with a proposal and with information informed. You also need to understand that even as you present a proposal, there's going to be, there may be some changes or some addendums to your proposal, and that's okay, right? I can tell you all that initially we asked, whenever we got our program started, I asked for like 200-some thousand for the program. Now I knew I wasn't gonna get 200,000, right? I want to go back to Anthony Burns, to the historical reference where it said that this one guy, they paid basically $40,000 for this one guy, right? So I was like, okay, let me try to see if I can get 200,000. I knew that wasn't gonna happen. That's okay. But I put it in there because I wanted to show them the value and the worth of what we were going to do, how this would impact students, also how it impacts faculty and staff who were participating in this program, because we were able to build into a budget to give stipends to faculty and staff who participated, as well as student peer mentors, okay? But your administrators got to be all in. And that takes tough, courageous conversations, okay? It takes, whether it's, let's just look at it from a collegiate level. It takes pulling data from your college, okay? Pull that data, sift through that data. If that data is not disaggregated, go and meet with institutional research at your ISD or your collegiate institution and pull that data and say, hey, I need this aggregated data here and there. Let's review it, let's talk about it. Let's get some supporters, some individuals from the community, from the schools, some parents, or whoever are gonna be a part of your group, and let's formalize a plan. That's gonna be a courageous conversation, because you're gonna come in there all passionate, and you're gonna have administrators that may not believe in your vision, or they may say the time is not now. That's okay, okay? If they give you a nugget, take that nugget and go with it. If you come out of there with a small win, it's a win because you went in there with nothing, right? So if you go in there with a proposal and they tell you this, that, and the other, you know, we're gonna change it. This is what we agreed to. Say, okay, thank you. And you take that and you run with it. I also want to emphasize the 3 P's: policy, practice, and partnership. Okay, that's what data helps to inform. Data will help you create policies or procedures. I want to go back to the 1850 Act, right? The Slavery Act 1850. That's a policy. It was a constitutional law. Okay, your institution has constitutional laws. It's embedded in your strategic plan. Okay, those are the policies and practices that informs how that institution moves. Okay, partnerships. Again, I've emphasized ISD partnerships and I've emphasized school district partnerships. Sometimes you may have to be the liaison to be able to make sure that those schools and those collegiate institutions or community organizations or businesses or whomever are actually at the same table talking. Okay. Diversity hiring practices. Say you come from an institution or you're in a community where the student population doesn't reflect, or should I say the faculty staff population doesn't reflect the student population. Okay. You say, well, I want to get more Black male teachers. Well, what you have to do is you really, again, have to go to what's happening on the HR level. You have to ask them questions to say, hey, where are you posting information? Okay, where are our jobs posting? Who's on our hiring committees? What is their perspective? And by diversity, I don't always mean diversity of meaning just Black or Hispanic. I also mean diversity of experience, right? You may have individuals who are veterans. You may have individuals who come from other countries. Maybe they're international persons, and maybe they're not getting opportunities to be on diversity committees, right? You have to really go in and ask these questions. You may say, well, I'm low on the totem pole. I don't know the players. I don't know all these people. I don't have enough power in my position to be able to make these things happen. Well, I'm going to push back. And I'm going to say, in 1850, whenever Anthony Burns was at the courthouse on trial, I'm pretty sure those people who were trying to break down the door did not think they had any political power either. But they broke down the door in an attempt to get him free. You have enough power presently to be able to go and talk to somebody to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. How can we sit down and be able to talk about a plan? How do we begin to look at what's going on the hiring level to see who's coming in and where they're coming from? You heard our previous colleagues talk about what type of pedagogy people are getting at the collegiate level. A big piece of what I help do in our urban education pathway is I work with our faculty, I work with our advisors to make sure that our students who are going through our program have an opportunity to learn and know where they're going to go, what communities that they're going to impact, and how they're going to be successful in staying as a teacher long term. Funding and resources. Last point I'll make is, again, funding and resources all go back to data-informed practice. You've heard people say all the time, put your money where your mouth is. Or you've heard people say, when you want to look for in a statement of the heart has the treasure, right? And what I found out is whenever they freed Anthony Burns, Leonard Grimes, the abolitionist, when he freed Anthony Burns, he felt like, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is. I'm not just an abolitionist. I'm not just talking the game, going around preaching, talking about Black Lives Matter. I'm gonna put up $41,000 to get this man free. That's the same argument you have to take to your leadership to say, okay, let's sit down and look at this strategic plan. Let's look at your budget. Where are you putting your money? What funds are you setting aside to be able to specifically work with programs, whether it's men of color programs, whether it's teacher development programs, etc. Where are your money going? Because we're going to have to hire people to do this. We're going to have to give some incentives. We're going to have data that is positive data, and it's going to take time. Okay, so that's just a general review of where we are and what we've done. Again, I could talk about it all day, but again, I just want to highlight those things if you want to work and build success programs. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Please populate in the Q&A questions for our three speakers. Dr. Wallace, I just wanted you to spend 2 minutes telling everyone the Texas A&M story that we talked about the other night.
Texas A&M. Remind me again.
Regarding the programs that they had that your school wasn't able to access.
Absolutely. So the first image that I shared earlier, you saw the image of one of our young brothers there. He was with two men on side of him. That actually, that program, that expo that we took our young men to was an expo where one of our program mentors, he's a white male, very good guy, very well connected with us. He works for a high-end energy automation company. And he says, hey, you know what, they're gonna have an expo at George R. Brown, see if some of your students can go. So I partnered with, you know, our current guys in our program at the time, and then some of our guys from our ISD, and we went to this expo. And there were other colleges who were invited. And the organization was really trying to target local schools. So we're at George R. Brown, and the local schools that they thought they were inviting were University of Texas, Texas A&M, Texas State. All of those schools are 2.5 to 4 hours away. That's not local. They did not invite Texas Southern, Prairie View, University of Houston, or any of our community colleges who were within Houston. So we get there and we're at the expo, and we're learning information and we're connecting, and you know, they saw that we were students, so they take us on this great tour and we get to meet a lot of people. And we found out at the expo that the reason Texas A&M was invited is because the CEO of that organization was a Texas A&M graduate. And he had earned his degree in engineering from Texas A&M. So he wanted to develop a pipeline with that institution. So we're there and I'm talking to one of the mentors who happened to be a Black male. He was one of the engineers there, and he pulled us to the side and he asked us what school we were from. And I told him University of Houston downtown. And he says, oh, great, what kind of programs do you all have? And I said, well, we actually have, specifically while we're here, is control and automation. We have process design, instrumentation engineering. And he says, perfect, that's the programs we're looking for. Those are the schools that we want to partner with. And I said, great, man, let's develop a relationship. And he says, well, I said, I heard y'all invited other schools. And he says, well, yeah, you know, the CEO went to A&M, and we really don't need students from A&M because the degree that they have is not the degree that we need. And what we also are trying to do is diversify our workforce, but we keep getting students from predominantly white institutions. And I said to myself, what can I do to help be the mediator there? So he says, well, if you guys could introduce me to some of the leaders at your school, I would really appreciate it. So I went back to our campus and I met with the program coordinator for the STEM Academy, specifically in control and instrumentation. I sat down and I met with her. She's an Asian woman. And she and I met and I said, hey, I went to this expo. You know, long story short, they really want to develop a relationship with the controlled instrumentation program. So she says, great, I'd love to meet them. We set up a meeting. They come over to the campus. They begin to review some of the facilities, and then they realize and recognize that some of the equipment that the program had was outdated. And they says, hey, you guys, I see you guys are teaching with this equipment. hey, we just updated our equipment and we have some equipment that we're about to give away that you guys can use. And she says, great, we'd love to take it. They eventually went and they did a tour of the facility of the company. They developed this relationship. And the last I heard, the company had gave them over $200,000 worth of new equipment. So that way the program can work to prepare students for the workforce. Had I not been at that expo, had I not had a conversation with the gentleman there, we would never have had an opportunity to continue to move forward with this relationship. And when you want to talk about diversifying the workforce or creating opportunities for our students, our men of color, our women of color, to be able to get instruction that's preparing them for the workforce, right? There's mindset that has to change. You as leaders, as educators, you got to be in the right place at the right time. And as I mentioned earlier, that you can still win. Even if you go in with a proposal and they say, hey, this and that, we ain't gonna do it. Look, you walked in there with nothing. You might walk out with a little bit of something. Take that little bit of something, and over time, it will maximize. And so, you know, I haven't checked up with that program in a while since the pandemic to know how they've grown and developed, but I can say that our students had a great time at that expo, and now our university has one more partner.
One of the things, and we'll get right into the QA, is all students need to know that very early on, you're on the clock as far as education, and you have to have a sense of urgency and, like the presenters talked about, a sense of agency, ownership, that this education is for me, and I need to take it a little more seriously. That's one of the things that's lacking in a lot of our students as they especially reach high school. And I try to tell them that you're on the clock. These credits count towards something for your future. Okay, let's see, Dr. Carolyn Holiday, do we have any questions for the panelists?
I see one question in the chat. I'll read it. It says, do you ever see this type of behavior being minimized or eliminated in the future on how Black boys and girls are treated in the classroom? What will it take? I think it really, for me, I think that it takes education of our pre-service teachers and our novice teachers and even our veteran teachers. Just making sure, again, that they are cognizant of their implicit biases, cognizant of the tenets and constructs around culturally relevant teaching. I think it's also important to really interrogate the curriculum that is being used in the classroom. I think that's a very important piece in all of this. The curriculum, again, centers whiteness. So we really need to make sure that as educators, parents, anyone who is interested in the education of our children, that we are looking at who is writing the curriculum, how the curriculum is presented. And we also need to make sure that we provide opportunities for our teachers to, they have to, of course, use the curriculum, but it has to be culturally relevant. So that's the important piece of making sure that they know their students and practicing those culturally relevant practices. But I think it will get better, but it really comes down to educating teachers, educating administrators, and really looking at things and disrupting racism on a systemic level.
I agree. And I also feel that it needs to be something that's a consistent conversation. Like, it can't just be a one-time thing that, okay, we did that this year and we're done with it. We can move on. It's something that consistently happens in the classroom, consistently happens in education. So it has to be an ongoing conversation across the board. And I think Dr. Wallace mentioned a lot of different things that we can do to make sure that that conversation continues to happen. And one part of that in particular that stood out to me was making sure that we are coming prepared with some type of an action plan, and then also being able to reflect on that action plan. How does it impact the students? do we see that impact? If not, how can we continue to change it and adjust it and move forward with it? So I definitely see that it's going to be minimized in the future. I don't know if it'll ever be eliminated, because those are things that we're still dealing with now in 2021 that we saw that were going on way back when. So I don't think that it'll ever be eliminated, but I definitely think we can minimize it and continue to work together to help transform what that looks like for our Black boys and girls across the education system.
And I would just want to echo what Dr. Thurman said in terms of when you see something, say something. There have been, I just think about activities, the activity I mentioned about, looking at slaves. And there was an activity that just occurred in, I think it was Mississippi, where students were asked to do a Twitter board on what it was like to be a slave. Students were asked to write about being a slave, write a letter, and what was it like on the plantation. All these kinds of things are happening now in 2021. So when we see things like that, we cannot stay silent. It is imperative, and it's difficult because it does take courage, but it is imperative that we speak up. And that's white educators, Black educators, Hispanic educators, everybody. We must speak up.
And that makes me think of something, and it kind of goes along with what we talked about earlier in terms of Black faces and voices being in those, higher up in leadership positions. But even as a math educator, going to the conferences that I attend, a lot of them also are for supervisor positions in mathematics. They have a lot of different webinars and different professional development opportunities that align with equity and making sure that, we speak to what that looks like in education. But when I attend those, most of the faces in there are white educators. Yes, we know that majority of the educators are white, but it just blew my mind that we aren't there as Black educators or other people of color there to be in that same voice. So it's almost like we can't just say it's only the white educators that need this. They're the ones that really need to understand what this looks like. It's us too. We need to make sure that we have a voice, that we are also educating ourselves and growing ourselves, because we can also have those different implicit biases about the students that are at risk or that are Black, Hispanic, at color. So we also need to make sure that we're incorporating those opportunities for everyone and being a part of it, and not just sitting back and putting that on somebody else's shoulders.
What can be done, panel, if you feel like you have the qualifications, but you just can't break through that glass ceiling to get your foot in the door? Is there certain activities that will help you get hired on? Maybe Dr. Wallace can take that one.
I can speak from my experience specifically, is that a lot of it for me, and you've heard this before, is networking, but it is strategic networking. What I was able to do a few years ago, I was at another college, and I connected with some mentors, some gentlemen and some women there who I would call now my mentors, and they were a part of some high-level success organizations. I'll speak specifically. They were part of the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators, which supports K-12, Texas Association of Black Personnel in Higher Ed, and then the American Association of Blacks in Higher Ed. Those three organizations had been around for 30, 40 years and were really focused on equity work around Black lives in education spaces. Well, the leaders I met were part of those groups. I would sit with them and talk to them about, my personal vision, and they would say, hey, you need to start going to these conferences. You need to start meeting these individuals. You need to be a part of this leadership institute. And as I joined those groups and I became active and I joined those institutes, it helped me from a professional standpoint, because now I was able to have more insight into what is actually happening in education that I wasn't getting on my day-to-day job. Those conversations in the position I was in at the time, I wasn't privy to those conversations, so I didn't have the context. But because I joined those organizations, they enlightened me to some things. I began to build relationships with those leaders. And then when jobs came available, I had a network of people I could call on to say, hey, I'm interested in this position, or I think I want to be this. And I had a network of people, individuals who were college presidents, individuals who had been deans and had retired, 2 superintendents in other states I had met. I went to Atlanta and did a study. I went to Miles College, HBCU in Birmingham, and did a study. And I met leaders there at this Leadership Institute, and they told me how to navigate career pathways. They said, hey, if you ever need me to be a reference, I'll be there for you. And over time, my career experiences grew. So when we talk about networking, it's important, that you reach out and you connect with individuals who will provide you an opportunity for success. One small story is I met a college president because of my mom. She was attending college. I had graduated at the time. I'm a first generation grad, and my mom went back to school. So I was helping her get back in school. And at the school she was attending, the college president was a Black male. And she met him at an orientation. And she said, she's telling him about me, I'm in education and whatnot. And she gave me the president's email, and he says, oh yeah, tell him to email me anytime. Well, people say that all the time, right? Well, I emailed the guy. And I said, hey, you met my mom? He says, I said, it's great for me to know you. She loves your institution. And I looked him up, and I told, I said, man, I love what you've done. I really appreciate what you've done. 2 months later, he replied back to me, and he says, I apologize for getting back to you late. It's a lot going on. He says, but, thank you so much for your kind words. Over the next year, he would email me every month. And I never got to know him personally. We never went out to lunch or anything like that. But what it did for me is I was inspired. And I would continuously follow his career. And now he's gone on to other institutions. And I'll say his name, Austin Lane. He was the president at Texas Southern University. And now he's at another institution out of state. And I had been following him since he was at Montgomery College years ago. So he inspired me. Never met the guy personally other than an email, but he stayed in contact and he gave me inspiring words. So your net worth becomes your net worth. So that will help you move up the ladder.
I want to say something really fast. I just want to give a shout out. One of my former students is on the call. She was actually in the first class that I had back in the 1980s. So I want to just say hi to Jennifer Guzmandi. I hope I said your name right. I knew her as Jennifer Toady. So I'm so glad that she is on this call. And she became a teacher, which does my heart so good. And I'm just so happy that she was here and she was part of this. So, hey, Jennifer.
Carolyn, I think there's another question that Kendra had received. What volunteer opportunities available to work with getting parents involved in their children's education?
That's a great question. I think that it's important for parents to definitely advocate for their children. Go to your child's campus, seek out the volunteer opportunities that are there. Be present and be a presence. If you see something that's not being done that you feel needs to be done, especially in terms of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, making sure that those learning resources in terms of literacy, math, science, and social studies are not reflective of your culture and your students' culture, that's when you need to go into that classroom and offer to read a book, offer to, come and talk to the class. We've done that. Keith and I, as parents, have always been very active in our children's school lives. And we are the first ones to say, you know, we'll read a book, we'll talk about our particular fields. So just be an advocate and don't necessarily wait for the opportunities to come to you. Be a force and provide those opportunities for yourself. Start a book group with students, something at lunchtime, a volunteer to be in the classroom so you can see exactly what is going on. So don't wait, make those opportunities happen for yourself.
Yes. And I would also encourage you to even go a step further and think globally for the whole district. Be a part of the board meetings. If you can attend those, see what are the different things that they're trying to pass. Look up who are the board members because we get to vote for them. Be a part of what things that are put on the table to help support what's going on in the campuses. Be a voice outside of just being there at the campus. But I think that Dr. Holliday made some great points also about just going in and seeing about partnering with some of the educators there and starting your own groups to help support your students and help them see what that can look like if there aren't any opportunities or avenues for them. But I know myself, I need to do better with being a part of the board. We get a newspaper where I'm at out here in Katy that broke down everything about what's on the bond that's on the ballot coming up and who are the different board members, and it gave some detailed information about them. And I was like, why didn't I get this when I was in Houston or when I was in the Dallas area? Like, have a voice to say, hey, we need transparency about what's going on in the district as well, if it's not there where you are. And I think that that could definitely help support.
Also, I think it's important to let your kids know that not graduating from college is not an option. You're going to keep going. It may be a struggle. You're going to go to community college. You can go to different venues, but you're going to keep working at it. Change your major, do something, but you're going to keep chipping away until you get it. Because sometimes it's not your knowledge, but sometimes it's the environment. Sometimes it's the student's effort. So keep plugging at it, and when you get into the right headspace and the environment is right, you will get that college degree. And the first one's the hardest, and then the next ones are a little bit easier. But you got to keep working at it. Okay, Dr. Carol Holiday, do we have any more questions here?
We have one more question in the Q&A. It says, panel, what are good sites to research about what is being done in different cities to assist young youth? And when I read that question, I thought NAACP I know they do a lot of youth programs, so that may be one place to start in terms of looking at what's out there for youth. And I'm sure Dr. Wallace and Dr. Thurman have some other ideas as well.
Yeah, I'm actually responding to that now. I'm putting some stuff in the chat into Jamel Cook. I actually look at stuff like that all the time, man, to be honest. It kind of gives me some insight. So J. Luke Wood, Dr. J. Luke Wood and Frank Harris, they're out in California and San Diego State. They actually have a pathway from K-12 into the community colleges. So they actually do a lot of research in the community colleges out there in California. And they've been doing it now for over a decade. And it emphasizes how community colleges and K-12 have to build relationships specifically around men of color. The BMI, Black Male Initiative at City University of New York, they actually have a plan right now I'm trying to adopt. I'm working on a plan in Houston, basically the Houston area Men of Color Collegiate Corridor, or HAM-C3 is what we're calling it, which is a strategic pathway to move young men from community service organizations and programs to K-12 to community college university, and you can track them as they move through the system, because we're finding that a lot of our young men get lost. Where the Black Male Initiative at City University of New York is doing that. And they, in their community college district, no matter what school they're in that college district, that school is partnered with the local ISD. So those young men can seamlessly move straight on in and they can capture their information. Project Males out in Austin, Texas. I serve on a board with them. the Texas Education Consortium for Male Students of Color. It focused specifically on K-12, works with Austin ISD. One of my good colleagues, Dr. Anthony Mays, is the chief of schools at Austin ISD. He's a member of the 100 Black Men. Dr. Emmett Campos, Dr. Luis Pon and Dr. Victor Sines are all professors at University of Texas and Texas A&M, and they're the founders of Project Males in Austin ISD. So those are just a few, but I also want to, lastly, I want to highlight the 100 Black Men. You have 100 Black Men chapters in multiple cities and communities. We're doing this work here in Houston, and I know they're doing it nationally. Urban Enrichment Institute in Fifth Ward, formerly known as Fifth Ward Enrichment Program. They work with youth, etc. There are many.
Yeah, let me jump in there. Sigma Beta clubs throughout the country. And also being on boards is very important. Also, a lot of universities have translational research, and they like people from the community to be on those boards because they need community input. So I've actually sat on a translational research board in San Antonio, and that's a great way to get to know the stakeholders at different universities. Okay, do we have any other questions, Carolyn? Dr. Oliver?
No, there's nothing else in the Q&A or in the chat. I think we're all done with questions and answers.
I'd like to thank Dr. Thurman for joining us, Dr. Wallace, Dr. Carolyn Holiday. This has been a great event. I'm going to leave you with two things for homework since we are educators. One, I highly recommend the 1619 podcast. I think they're going to come out with more episodes. I learned a great deal from that. And also check out the Silence is Not an Option podcast by Don Lemon and CNN. Excellent, 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 and increase your knowledge. This session will be recorded if you need a recording, and look for this session on a podcast, and we'll have future webinars and podcasts on different topics. We hope to cover healthcare, business, music, and all types of professional endeavors. Thanks everybody for joining us, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Do you want the presenters to stay on for a second, Carolyn?